EAGLES. Eagles.
Welcome in, everybody, to a special nighttime edition of Birds 365 here on JAKIB Sports. I'm your host, Zander Krause. That's John McMullen, the #1 Eagles beat reporter in town, joining us live from New Orleans for a special nightcap, Birds 365. A lot of stuff going on today. Johnny Mac, how you doing down there in New Orleans, brother? You staying healthy?
Yeah, so far so good. I got the fingers crossed because there's some kind of virus going on. I don't know if it's the NOLA virus though, because a lot of Eagles had the problem before they came down here, so maybe they took it with them.
Right.
But either way, as of now, it happened, I think, early enough in the week where there's no concern that anybody's going to miss the game. But you know, it's not great. The Eagles just put out their injury report a few minutes ago, and Jalen Carter was upgraded to a full participant, so that's a good sign.
That's a very good.
Now, he was not at media availability again this morning, so they're clearly trying to keep him away from people. You know, I've been told there's 3 or 4 other players dealing with something. Nobody else, though, is on the injury report for illness. 3 limited players. Nick Gates tweaked his groin. Generally isn't active anyway. Brandon Graham's listed as limited with the elbow, which is really the rehab from the, torn triceps. And Devontae Smith is still dealing with that hamstring. So those were the limited players. Full participants, guys who've been dealing with stuff. Jalen Carter, as I mentioned. Zach Bond, who's got a groin issue. Britton Covey, we know, still has the neck issue. Landon Dickerson with the knee, but he's playing. Kenny Gainwell with the concussion, going through the protocol, plus a knee. Dallas Goedert, ankle, but he's playing. Cam Jurgens back, but he's playing. And CJ Uzomah, who's coming back from an abdomen issue, and he's not on the 53-man roster, only on the practice window. So pretty healthy, even though that's a lot of names. Only 3 limited players, and you know, 1 doesn't play typically. 1's Brandon, and the only sort of star is Devontae Smith dealing with something.
Yeah, so we'll see how it all plays out. J-Mac, what can you tell? I mean, it does sound like everything's going good if Jalen Carter's already back to a full participant, but I don't know. You know, I think people started to get a little nervous today because now there's reports going out spreading in the locker room based on what Vic Fangio said. I've been working all day on the show, so what more can you tell the people about this virus or whatever it is that's going around? And is there any concern that, you know how it gets, John, you get sick, maybe you get a little weaker. I don't know. I don't think it's a problem because we still are 3 days out from this thing, but your level of concern and just what more you know about what's going on down there.
Not much. I mean, Vic let the cat out of the bag. I can also tell you that Vic himself has been dealing with something. So, you know, that he's part of it as well. So it's been going around. Nolan Smith had it last week, was wearing a mask in the locker room. So, like I said, they actually brought it down to New Orleans. So I wouldn't blame New Orleans, but it's more prevalent than just Jalen Carter. But remember, if people don't miss practice, you don't have to list them on the injury report. In the case of Jalen Carter, he was listed because he was limited yesterday. So that's the difference. And again, there's no concern that guys aren't going to play. But yeah, I mean, people handle it differently. You might be Michael Jordan in the flu game.
Yeah.
You have your best game ever, but most people aren't at 100% when they're dealing with some kind of illness. And, you know, Nolan himself said, you know, when people tried to talk to him when he did have the mask on, he was like, you don't want to deal with what I'm dealing with. So it's not positive, but it's not like people are going to miss the game.
No. All right. Good stuff there. A little, it definitely got a little bit of some people on edge though today, John, especially when Vic Fangio said that. And then did you hear, is Nolan Smith have it too? I guess you mentioned that he had the mask on.
No, he's better. He's better, but he had it last week. He's better. I saw him today. He's completely fine.
Any Kansas City players dealing with it?
Not that I know of. So, you can add that to the list of excuses
Or conspiracies.
Pre-excuses, yeah, pre-excuses. So, go win the game, they all go away.
Yeah.
Lose the game, they got sick. The referees are for Kansas City. What's the third one? I forget the third one, but the preemptive excuses. So yeah,
no excuses. John, JAKIB.
Kellen Moore leaving.
Yeah, there you go. No excuses on JAKIB Sports. We will not allow it. We are elevating the conversation.
Well, it was funny. I mean,
good.
I should mention Kellen Moore is funny because the New Orleans reporters. So what happens is there's a big press conference room for Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. Then you have another room where a group of players are on risers, what it's called, the Saquons of the world, Jordan Mailata, Landon Johnson, Brandon Graham, guys like that, CJ, guys like that. And then there's a middle room with, I counted 28 tables, I believe, with everybody, every other player and assistant coach available. And, Nick and Jalen go first, and then the rest of the players come in. And, there's a large group always with the risers because those are the more high-profile players. And then the tables, lesser people, still way too many people. They got to cut back on the people, by the way. And especially the ones who ask goofy questions, but I digress.
Like goofy questions. I mean, we've had enough goofy questions to last a lifetime.
Oh my Lord. I was getting frustrated today.
Yeah.
I was trying to get Milton Williams at the end of the session, and there's some goofball who just wouldn't let him go, talking about your Super Bowl dream. I'm like, I got serious questions to ask the guy. Anyway, drives me crazy.
I don't blame
you. Of the 28 tables, only one was mobbed before things started, and that was Kellen Moore, because all the New Orleans reporters just staked it out like it was like it was a late night bank robbery. That the worst kept secret in the NFL is Kellen Moore is going to be the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints. So, and got to talk to Kevin Patullo today. He's likely going to be the next offensive coordinator. And they've had an interesting relationship. So that's an interesting story. And that's up on SI if anybody wants to read it there. But anyway, Kellen Moore, it was funny. Just mobbed by New Orleans people.
That's funny. New Orleans is getting Kellen Moore. You know what? What's your take on that? New Orleans picking up Kellen Moore. You think he's going to be an all right head coach?
I mean, I don't know. It's really tough to gauge. They don't have a good quarterback situation. I know Kellen was concerned about that, and he wanted some assurances that he wasn't going to go in there and get blown out in a year or two because they have a bad quarterback situation. Until you salvage that, until you solve that, it's very difficult to win in this league. So once they made assurances that they're in it for the long haul, then it becomes like everybody else. They got to make good decisions. They got to build a good roster, and Kellen's proven he could build successful offenses, different types of offenses.
That's true.
I don't know if he's going to be the leader because it's tough. It's been tough to get to know him in that way. But I do know that quarterbacks tend to be natural leaders just by the nature of the position. And for those who don't know, I say it all the time. I mean, he was a big-time college quarterback. I mean, set
Yeah.
Every college record at one point was 50-3 as a starter at Boise State. So I think there's got to be some leadership in there.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I think about, and you kind of gave just a good answer there to it, but I always think about what you always tell me, John. Play calling and offensive scheme is a small percentage of the pie when you become a head coach, and there's a lot more things that go into it. So I do wonder how he'll handle that, but it's interesting that it's happening now. You don't think it's? I know your take on this, but I got to ask you. No concern that has any impact on the game this week, right?
No, none. That I have no concern about. The Saints have done it the correct way. They have not talked to
I
Kellen
think
Moore.
Howie learned from it. It sounds like Howie was out in front of it too, trying to make sure he knew what was going on.
Yeah, well, he knew what was going on. Again, I think that the misunderstanding with Jonathan Gannon, the Cardinals didn't follow the rules and didn't wait until after the Super Bowl. If they did follow the rules, perhaps the Eagles could have made a deal with Vic Fangio, and that's why the Eagles were upset and went with the tampering route. But they did not speak with Jonathan Gannon leading up to the Super Bowl. They did not interview him. The Colts did interview Shane Steichen because they were permitted to, and they did. And Kellen interviewed, obviously, the week prior to coming down here. And since that time, New Orleans has played by the rules, and they'll hire him after the game, and everything will be copacetic from that standpoint. But it's not going to affect the game whatsoever except for being the pre-designed excuse if needed. Nobody will bring it up, obviously, if they win the game.
No doubt about it. John, bring us inside, man. Paint the picture for us. What's the energy like down there in New Orleans? I got to be honest, I'm not there, but it does feel like there's a little bit of fatigue setting in on all counts. Reporters, players, coaches, where it's just like, good Lord, when are we going to be able to get some people? When are we going to be able to call some plays, man? Bring us inside. What's the energy like down there right now?
I mean, you're talking to the wrong guy. I'm stuck in a stinking media room for 12 hours, so I don't get to see the fans that much or anything like that. They're sort of funneling in later in the week, and then it actually, from that standpoint, gets bigger and bigger. And then you have the celebrities jetting into New Orleans Saturday or Sunday, and that part gets ramped up. But yeah, from the media portion, the media week, yeah, I mean, boy, the Eagles were happy when that was over today.
Yeah,
because it's just overwhelming. And Nick Sirianni talked about it all week, trying to keep things as normal as possible. You can't. How do you keep things as normal as possible in this, other than, I haven't gotten the full report yet for practice today, but they ran their Wednesday practice like a normal Wednesday practice, and that's the way he's doing it when he says trying to keep it as normal as possible. That's what he's talking about. But the rest of it is just, it's a lot. It's a lot on the players and the coaches.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it seems like it is from my perspective. It must be a lot for them down there, but they're all paid professionals, and that's why I liked the fact that a lot of the leaders on this team, John, even the young leaders, have been there. Even if they didn't win in 22, even if they're different teams now, just being able to experience it once before, I do think helps in a big way. But we will see. What about the takeaways today, John, from the media session? I know it's rambunctious. I know there's a lot of dumb questions, but anything good that came from the media session? Any bulletin board material, anything like that stuck out from today's session?
No, I was bogged down trying to get interesting stories, trying to get angles that nobody else is doing sort of late in the week, which is difficult to do.
Yeah.
I did get Joe Casper, who's the, safeties coach, somebody you don't get to talk to very much. He said some interesting things about, going back to the last practice in Philadelphia. Brent Selleck was running routes against the safeties, and we're all there watching and saying, well, that's pretty interesting. Maybe they're using Brent. He's played for 11 years or whatever, and very savvy player when he was a player, and that's where you're trying to replicate somebody like Travis Kelce, who understands the tricks of the trade, so to speak, more than obviously you can't replicate the athleticism with a retired player, but you can sort of mimic the savviness, if that makes sense, how they move their shoulders, how they try to create separation, things like that. And Joe said, we do that every Thursday because that's when Brent's available. Brent's part of the organization, but he did admit it means more this week because of Kelce, and to have everybody on sort of lockdown when it comes to that kind of stuff. And then he also said something interesting with Avonte Maddox. I know he's kind of a forgotten player because he got benched, and you got all these knuckleheads who say he's a crappy player and all that. And he called him a future coach, which I thought was interesting. And he's trying to push him in that direction, not because he thinks he's going to retire, by the way. He's got plenty left in the tank, but in the future, because he's such a smart player, he wants him to go into coaching. Also caught up with Lewis Seen, who's not even going to play, but I think that's an interesting story from the standpoint of, he gets to come in here late, and now he's part of a Super Bowl team, and he might get a Super Bowl ring, and how that's sort of been for him, and going through this, and being thrown into this whirlwind. Plus, he's a Georgia guy, so he knows everybody. He knows all those. He knows the Jalen Carters, the Nola Smiths, the N'Kobe Deans, the Kelly Ringos. Who did I miss? I missed one, but he knows all the Georgia guys.
Georgia,
so he's kind of an interesting story. So I wanted to catch up with him. And then Nick and Jalen. I mean, what else can they say? How many times can Nick Sirianni answer the same question? He did, have a lighthearted moment when some rando asked about his opening press conference 4 years ago. And he just, self-deprecating. I think I've gotten a little bit better. He got a little bit of a chuckle there. But yeah, what more could those guys say at this point?
I don't know. I really don't. I think they're tired of hearing themselves talk. I think reporters are tired of hearing from them. I mean, that's why you're just in nothing land with these questions.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And look, I mean, it's not like the Eagles are the only one to deal with it. Everybody who's in the Super Bowl goes through it. But it has gotten, worse and worse and worse and worse. And I'm telling the NFL, lock it down a little bit, man. Just cut it back. But they're never going to do that.
No, they're not. John, it's the biggest TV show in the world every year. Think about that. So that if anything, this thing might get bigger. It wouldn't surprise me if they went to 8 days on Media Row in some point in the future. So, but no, it's good to get there. Any developing? You mentioned you were trying to get some off the cuff storylines. And then you said you talked to Joe Casper. You said he's the safeties coach, right? So does he work directly with Christian Parker, who's the defensive backs coach, or are they completely separate, or what?
Well, they're separate from, the Eagles have a safeties coach who's Joe, and they have a cornerbacks coach who's Roy Anderson, and then Christian Parker's in charge of everybody. So,
okay.
So he's in charge of the whole defensive backfield. But when it comes to working with the guys in positional drills and individual drills, CJ and Reed and everybody split off with Joe Casper, and the corners Quignon and Darius Slay, and Cooper DeJean split off with Roy Anderson, and Christian oversees the entire thing. I was also trying to figure out, Nick Sirianni is notorious for not letting his assistant coaches go. He tells all the guys, whether it was Shane Steichen, Jonathan Gannon, it'll be Kellen Moore this time. This is the Philadelphia Eagles coaching staff. You can't have anybody. But, you cannot block people from coordinator promotions anymore. So obviously the assumption is that Doug Nussmeier sort of, followed Kellen Moore around. They're very close. He'll probably be his offensive coordinator in New Orleans. So you're probably looking at a new quarterbacks coach. And then it's going to be interesting from the defensive side. I have no idea, but if Kellen wants to pluck somebody from the staff, he can do it by giving him the defensive coordinator position. So Clint Hurt, Christian Parker, Bobby King would be the three in that mix. I would think it would be more Clint Hurt or Christian Parker, but we'll see. Did ask Bobby King about that. He was like, really? Defensive coordinator? So I don't get the feeling that he's in the mix. But, Clint Hurt used to be the defensive coordinator in Seattle. So that's something to keep an eye on after the game.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a candidate soon, Clint Hurt. He's had a good year with that defensive line. We'll see what happens there. John, while we're on the topic of under the radar or underrated, I guess you could call it, storylines and stuff that you were pursuing, let's go to a storyline for the game, John. Everybody's talking about Hurts and Mahomes and Kelsey or Sirianni and Reed and all of those things. But what's an Eagles storyline, Eagles Chiefs storyline in this game you're looking at that maybe is not getting talked about enough?
Boy, I think we've talked about every potential storyline of this freaking potential game. I mean, if you look at surprises or things like that, nobody ever talks about special teams. I do think that's an advantage for the Chiefs, unfortunately for the Eagles. So
the highest graded team in the playoffs right now in special teams.
Yeah. So if something happens on that sort of third phase, it could be the Eagles, it could be the Chiefs' advantage. Poll report came in. Yeah, the Eagles kept it very similar to what they do in the regular season. I love because, the PFWA has one poll reporter for each team. Luke Johnson does it for the Chiefs. And Nikki Habala, I always hate saying, because I know I butchered Nikki's name, who's a wonderful writer. She covers the Commanders. But, I mean, I find it interesting. I mean, the Eagles do these tackling circuit drills and ball security circuit drills every week during the season. And it's interesting when you see somebody from outside watching it, like it's new to them. So you start to look at it. For me, it's like old hat, but for people that don't see it, so the Eagles do things differently than a lot of teams, and maybe that's another aspect that Nick Sirianni probably doesn't get enough credit for.
Yeah,
because because Nicky was writing about it like it was, a little bit strange, and Nick's like, it's been that way all year. That's what we do, and it has.
That's interesting there. I want to go back to the special teams comment too with that. Nick has kind of mentioned a couple of times, John, this week, which I do think has become a theme, which I appreciate, but it almost seems like he's more willing than Jalen Hurts to say he learned from the Super Bowl in 2022 and Super Bowl 57. Perhaps special teams is one of those things because it obviously, had a big impact on Super Bowl 57. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, I've talked about that a lot. I think the Eagles made a significant mistake. For people that forget, Aaron Cepas was hurt late in the season against the New York Giants. He was the punter at the time. And Brett Kern, who was a veteran punter at the end of his career, came in and, wasn't great, but as a veteran, he didn't make many mistakes. Didn't have the strongest leg at that point of his career. And he punted throughout the playoffs as well. In the Super Bowl, Aaron was, fighting hard to come back. He was working hard, very similar to Brandon Graham this year, working hard, try to get back for the Super Bowl. And the Eagles said, let's reward him. He's ready to go. And it was just a bad decision. And I don't think it wasn't physical, but I mean, there was clearly some rust when you kick it the wrong way. And if Brad Kern was in there, he probably kicks it the right way. And maybe Kadarius Toney goes for 10, 15 yards, whatever, with a good punt return. And you wouldn't be talking about that. But I think that was more of a personnel decision. And it backfired on him. So from this standpoint now, we've talked about Jake Elliott having a difficult season. I think part of that has been the regression of Rick Lovato as the long snapper. I think that's part of it. You hope that stuff doesn't bubble up in the Super Bowl.
Good stuff there, John. I do want to bring you inside. I do want to get you to expand on one of the things you mentioned you wrote about, John, and that's Kevin Patullo and Kellen Moore. You talked about how he had the media contingency. He's basically all but announced as the head coach of the New Orleans Saints at this point. But, you mentioned, and John, I'll give you credit, all right, because back in, I don't know, the wild card divisional round when Kellen got his first interview and we inevitably had to talk about a replacement, you were the guy who mentioned Kevin Patullo. Everybody else is saying all these names. You said Kevin Patullo. It seems like it's going to be him. And you wrote a story about how close he's gotten with Kellen Moore since his time here. What can you tell us more about that? I think people are eager to know a little bit more about Kevin Patullo, John.
Yeah, well, number one, he's been Nick's right-hand man since he got here, and probably if he had the druthers, he probably would have hired him twice, but he couldn't. Sort of you have to have the power dynamic. On the first occasion, Brian Johnson was a hot candidate, and people were interviewing him to be offensive coordinator, even head coach. And the Eagles were concerned about losing him, and to keep him, they had to elevate him to offensive coordinator. I think if it were up to Nick, he would have hired Kevin Patullo then. And last year, he just didn't have the cachet with the organization. They wanted him to go outside to bring in new ideas and all that kind of nonsense that never developed, and they went back to the same offense they always have had here, because they're building around the quarterback. That's what you do. And Kevin was talking to me about that today, and the fact that and he brought up Indianapolis because he was in Indianapolis with Nick as well, and Nick has often brought that up to me over the years, and the fact that we built, in the case of Nick saying, we built 3 different offenses over 3 seasons because we had to.
Right.
Because that was the dramatic shift from Andrew Luck to Jacoby Brissett and then Phillip Rivers. 3 completely different styles of quarterbacks, and they had to build 3 different offenses. Here with the Eagles, you have an entrenched quarterback, so that's why whether Shane Steichen or even Nick Sirianni, if you want to go back to Nick, Shane Steichen, Brian Johnson, and now Kellen Moore, it looks very familiar because they're each building the offense around the quarterback. But one of the strengths of Kellen Moore that Kevin Patullo talked about was, if you look at his Dallas offense, it looks different. Yeah. It does look different. If you look at his Chargers offense, it looks different because he was building around the players he had, and that's what he's doing here. And Kevin has learned from all these people. So I wouldn't be jumping off. I know a lot of people are, because for whatever reason they don't know him well enough, or he doesn't have enough experience, or you got to have continuity people. Well, they're in the Super Bowl and with a first-year coordinator here. Obviously had experience elsewhere. So then the goalposts shift to, he's a first-year guy, but he's been a coordinator elsewhere. So now you need the veteran guy. And, it can work both ways. Shane was not a veteran guy. it can work both ways. So, there's no one way to do it.
No doubt about it. Good stuff there, Johnny Mac. Johnny, I'm going to take a commercial break here. We'll come back. We'll kick it around for a little bit more here on this nighttime edition of Birds 365. I'll read a couple of our super chats. We appreciate all of you guys. Anybody who wants to hit John with a question, like John said, we've talked to you about just about everything possible with this game. But if you do have a question for John, drop them in there in the chat with the super chat, and I will get to it for John before I let him go for the night. Seth Shifley says, celebrating my birthday with the best show on YouTube. Thanks, Big Z and J-Mac. Keep the main thing. Cry, Swifties, cry. Happy birthday, Seth. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you, man, for being here. Vulnerable Vitality checks in, John. He says, John, take this $10 and go get yourself the finest beer on tap at the hotel. Thank you for your coverage. Can we get a go Birds from you? LOL. I don't think so, Vitality.
Can't get that. Can't do that.